It's great to see you,
Likewise.
and we're very excited to have you here today. So, this is Robert Lawrence Kuhn, a very distinguished guest. He has been doing a really exciting TV show called Closer to Truth, which really keeps us informed. And he's also an expert on China. I mean, I can't believe how much you know. So he just wrote this absolutely wonderful paper on panpsychism. And, you know, we've been chatting about doing a show together. And so I just invited him to be a keynote because his paper was so interesting. So, without further ado, I wanted to you ready for your talk. Can you see okay here? And
I can see everyone. Thanks for coming. Looking forward to our conversations.
perfect. Okay, Robert, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Susan. I've really been looking forward for us working together, and it's a pleasure to participate in MindFest. I'm especially pleased, as you've said, that Closer to Truth is partnering with MindFest to present discussions with several keynote speakers and others. Peter Getzells and I, Peter is Closer to Truth co-director, co-creator, producer, and director, are excited to bring these critical ways of thinking to our global audiences via the Closer to Truth website and Closer to Truth YouTube channel. Now, I'm going to be talking about AI consciousness, which is the hot topic, and its various implications from ethics to dangers are being explored at this conference, which is great. I'm going to address the core underlying assumption that AI will become conscious at some point in its exponential growth, and I'll also touch a bit on virtual immortality. Now, here's my central thesis. To assess AI consciousness in the absence of a fundamental theory of consciousness makes no sense. In fact, I contend that AI consciousness, as well as virtual immortality, personal identity, free will, even meaning, purpose, value, and life after death, for that matter, cannot be approached, much less adjudicated, except in the light of particular theories of consciousness. And when I say consciousness, I mean phenomenal consciousness, because in the field of consciousness, there are many different varieties. But we're talking about phenomenal consciousness, which is the so-called hard problem. My corollary thesis is that understanding phenomenal consciousness per se at this point of human knowledge cannot be limited to selected ways of thinking or knowing, but should seek expansive yet rational diversity. It's what I call a landscape, which is the paper Susan referred to, which I'll briefly discuss later. Now, I love all these topics, AI consciousness, virtual immortality, all of them, and I can argue them endlessly, but today my job here must be restricted to these two theses. Number one, to assess AI consciousness requires a theory of consciousness, and two, theories of consciousness should be explored broadly. Now, to pick the theory of computational functionalism, it's a combination of functionalism in general and computational information approach to the brain, as the theory of consciousness, which frankly most proponents of AI consciousness assume, whether they realize it or not, is at best premature. Now, what I want to do to open is to take you quickly through my theories of consciousness paper. It was published last August in Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology, where I deal with these issues in depth. It's called A Landscape of Consciousness Toward a Taxonomy of Explanations and Implications, and it presents over 200 theories. It's available online. Now, I'm going to screen share and show it to you. And let me do that now. Let's see where it is. There we go. Okay. So we're going to be discussing today AI consciousness in search of a fundamental theory. Now, this is the presentation I give about a landscape of consciousness, which is available online on Closer to Truth. I've given this full explanation of what this landscape is, which includes all the different kinds of consciousness. I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to go through it extremely rapidly just to give you a sense of the enormous kinds of consciousness theories that there are, and then focus on what that means for AI consciousness. So here we go. We just do an introduction of what a landscape is, addressing these questions, the tensions in consciousness. Now, here is the overview of what I have as the 10 categories that I discuss consciousness in organizing a taxonomy of these 200 plus theories. There are about 180 of larger theories, and then 50 or so that I have included as well. So it's well over 200 theories. Materialism theories you're familiar with, non-reductive physicalism, quantum theories, integrated information theory, panpsychisms. I put an S on it because there are different kinds, and Susan and I have discussed many of these things. Monisms, dualisms, idealisms. And then a category I call anomalous and altered state theories. This is not a theory of consciousness as much as it's a mechanism that if you believe in these kinds of things, anomalous cognition, ESP, parapsychology, etc., or see deeper meaning in altered states such as meditation or psychedelics or various other kinds of things, then that might lead to theories of consciousness. And the last category I call challenge theories, where there are people who argue that it's impossible to know consciousness or various things like that. I'm going to take you through very quickly. And this is a diagram that was created by Alex Gomez Marin and myself to allocate all the theories in this paper. I just want to give you a flavor of what that means. You can see the 10 categories, materialism at the top, which is the whole first half, and then the other 9 categories are as well. I point out that materialism is the only category that has 3 levels of organization. The main category, materialism, and then 10 subcategories, which I define as philosophical, neurobiological, electromagnetic, relational, representational, language, etc. And then the theories below those as they are classified. All the other theories just have 2 levels, the basic category and then the theories themselves, because of the complexity of materialism. And why this is the case is that with many of the other non-materialist theories of consciousness, once you assume that to be the case, there's not a lot of progress you can make. That may be a controversial statement, but not a lot, and therefore you have the theories. With materialist theories, because you can make progress, because everything is material in pure physicalism, there are much broader categories. That doesn't make it right or wrong. That's no commentary on the veracity of the theory. It is a commentary on the philosophical structure of the theory. That's why there are 3 categories. Okay, so this is the organization. Now I'm going to go through it very rapidly so you can get a sense of all the different theories. And once again, the full discussion of this paper, Landscape of Consciousness, is on the Closer to Truth website or YouTube channel. So materialism theories, now here I'm listing all the second level categories that you saw on the chart. Here they are listed where you can quickly scan them. I'm not going to go over each of them, but they are relatively independent of each other. And of course, there can be nesting. It's not one or the other. Many of these, if you want to build them together, work just fine. Then, for the next few pages, I take each of the subcategories of materialism, like philosophical is the first, and then I develop, I list here all the theories that are what I call philosophical approaches to materialism. And you have John Searle, Ned Block, David Papineau, Rebecca Goldstein. Each one has a different approach to the question, and they are very, very different. Now I'm just going to go these other neurobiological, of course. Francis Crick and Christoph Koch have neural correlates of consciousness. The second, many, many others. Dan Dennett, global workspace theory, Marvin Minsky. You can see all the different theories, and many perhaps that you haven't heard of, many that I hadn't heard of before I did this paper. In fact, when I did the paper, it was accidentally published before it was ready, and I was actually quite upset by that. But because of that, I got a lot of commentary of theories that I had left out, which I hadn't heard of. For example, the second to last, Bunge's emergent materialism. And because of that, I put it in. So I actually was very grateful to many people who contributed theories. So now here are the other electromagnetic theories, the different kinds, computational and informational, homeostatic and effective theories, Anil Seth's beast machine, being you theories, Antonio Damasio, Carl Friston's free energy. These are really important theories in consciousness studies, particularly scientific or materialistic theories. Embodied and inactive, which is a very interesting area. Francisco Varales had a neurophenomenology. Evan Thompson has developed this, many different approaches to embodiment. Then relational theories in terms of relationships. Representational is one of the most prominent theories with first order representations, higher order, and then different individuals have different articulations of this. All very interesting. Language theories. I actually didn't have language in my original version because I didn't think it was directly related to consciousness, phenomenal consciousness per se. The one of the peer reviewers said that I should. And so I included it, but I still make it a little bit of an exception. Some would say that it has no relationship, but some say it does, and therefore I do include it. And then evolutionary approaches. Here's some of the evolutionary theories. Dan Dennett has developed it very well, and others have as well at different levels of the biological hierarchy. Now, the second category is non-reductive physicalism, and in this and this is consciousness entirely physical, solely the product of brains, but mental states or properties are irreducibly distinct. Now, what's critical in non-reductive physicalism is two concepts of strong emergence and top-down causation, and we see how that works. Some Christian philosophers of religion have adapted this in their harmonization of what they believe to be the revealed truth about consciousness and their scientific and philosophical analysis. Certainly worth thinking about how it works. Quantum theories are becoming more and more popular. I was an extreme skeptic about quantum theories until I did this paper. And I'm still a skeptic, but maybe a little less adamantly so after going through it. But I would point out when you see quantum theories, it sounds like one thing, but you look at them, they're radically different kinds of approaches. Some would have quantum processes working in the brain, like Roger Penrose, Stuart Hameroff, in terms of microtubules. Others would have quantum explanations beyond the brain and sort of interacting with the entire universe in some way. Some panpsychism theories develop that. And then there's quantum theories that emerge from kind of a dual aspects of one reality. So many different kinds of quantum theories, and here I list just a few of them. Different individuals who have come up with consciousness, some really interesting things. Stephen Wolfram has consciousness in what he calls the ruliad, which is that a rule that rules or simple rules lead to the complexity, and that underlines everything. Many different theories of quantum consciousness. I put Carlo Rovelli last. As I told Carlo, I never put him last on anything except here, because here he criticizes all the rest. And he says that all quantum theories are basically of consciousness are basically nonsense. I do not necessarily agree with that, but I give Carlo the last word. Then integrated information theory, many of you are very familiar with it, created by Giulio Tononi and supported by Christoph Koch, and it takes it takes consciousness seriously, develops postulates and goes from that. There's a big controversy now because it was labeled pseudoscience in an open letter last September of 124 philosophers and scientists criticizing it, and many criticized back. In Nature Neuroscience, literally in the last few days, both sides published definitive papers supporting and attacking integrated information theory, and an excellent commentary by Alex Gomez-Marin and Anil Seth, both who have very opposite points of view in terms of a fundamental theory of conscience, but came together to analyze the situation. So we're going to go back into all of these panpsychisms. I just list many different kinds of how it works, from micro psychisms, where every little particle or every wave sort of has a proto-consciousness, to pan-proto-psychism, which means they're not really conscious, but when you get some together, then they become conscious. Cosmopsychism, which is that the whole universe is sort of the psychic element and we're all part of it, and many other different applications of panpsychism. Many different kinds of monisms. And these theories, that's why I call the paper a landscape of consciousness, not the landscape, because there are many different ways to classify it. With many of the monisms and panpsychisms, there's overlap. You can classify one way or another way. It's arbitrary. Galen Strawson, who is a marvelous panpsychist in terms of his explanations, he radically feels that panpsychism is the true materialism. And so he says he's a materialist, but he's a panpsychist because that's the true monism. So I classified his panpsychism under monism because that makes Galen feel good, and he's a good friend. I want him to feel good. I want everybody to feel good, but everybody can't be right with all these different theories. And then dualisms are philosophically out of favor over the last couple of centuries. It was the default condition in various religions, of course, for millennia. Descartes famously did that. And then there are many different kinds of explanations of dualism, which I want to bring to the audiences and in the same analysis with all the scientific theories, bring all the dualistic theories, and then even into the religious foundations, which is this category in the Hebrew Bible, in the New Testament, Islamic philosophy, even in indigenous religions, and certainly in Indian philosophy, where dualism is a secondary, idealism is the primary one, as we'll come to next. But there are many different aspects. Rudolf Steiner, for example, and Theosophy have their approach to an esoteric soul, which I had heard of, but I thought was not worth including. But when my paper was published prematurely, I got several angry letters that I had left it out. I mean, really angry. I'd never seen so many people angry at me for anything. Now, because I left out Rudolf Steiner's theory, they were angry. So in the final version, I included it, and I actually enjoyed studying it and learning how to explain it. Doesn't change my opinion about it, but nonetheless, it is included. Then idealisms, which is also growing along with panpsychism, many different varieties, starting with Indian cosmic consciousness, which is really very deep and very profound and very early. How Buddhism approaches phenomenal consciousness, that in illusory, very important. The Tao Te Ching, which is China's indigenous religion, its only indigenous religion, has a very fascinating approach to consciousness. Then, of course, everybody in the field knows Bernardo Kastrup's analytical idealism, Donald Hoffman, Ian McGilchrist, Deepak Chopra, many others who have different varieties of idealism. Same general concept that ultimately consciousness is the ultimate reality. And then, as I told you, I have this category called anomalous and altered states theories, which deals with all the different kinds of non-traditional ways of sensation and knowledge in terms of ESP or parapsychology or psi, or different approaches to that, and different theories that engage some of these other ways of thinking to come up with their own theories. These are not necessarily theories themselves, although some are, but they're all, shall we say, grounded on the reality of this of anomalous cognition in one way or the other. And there are many different varieties, near-death experiences, survival, past lives. All of those things are very very much focused on by a large segment in the popular press. I have discounted that as I did with quantum theories for a long time. And in doing this paper, I realized I needed to give a serious consideration to it. So it's presented here by the leading advocates of those things as ways of discerning the nature of consciousness. So I'm certainly pleased to include it, but I am not necessarily an advocate of those ideas. And then phenomenology in continental philosophy has brought a different way of thinking to the whole question of consciousness. And as I mentioned, Francisco Villala developed it, even Thompson has developed, Michel Bitball a French philosopher, has really developed this very significantly. And it's not necessarily a non-physical approach to consciousness. It may sound it, but it's not. But it does give it a different feel and worth our understanding the field. See. Challenge theories are people like Tom Nagel, who believes that we don't understand consciousness, but has no idea what it really would be. Colin McGinn, who has developed, he's been called a Mysterian. He doesn't like that term. He has very specific ideas in his development, and others who kind of question the whole idea. Now, we're going to focus on the implications of consciousness theories. Now, in my paper, I deal with four kinds of things: meaning, purpose, and value, if there's any in the universe, how each individual theory of consciousness would affect it, AI consciousness, virtual immortality, and survival beyond death. I'm going to focus on AI consciousness here, but the others, again, can be dealt with in the paper. This is value. Steven Weinberg's famous remark: the more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it also seems pointless, is a starting place for trying to understand, at least under materialism, how you deal with value. Other materialists would try to build value, and there's real value and ultimate meaning in some human sense, and that's, of course, to some degree true. But Steven Weinberg was brutally honest, I believe, in terms of materialism, and each of the others. So here, let me just show you where we'll go: virtual immortality and then survival beyond death, and that's the whole paper. Let's focus now on AI consciousness, and specifically how it would be affected by each of the different categories, not the specific 200, but the basic, 8, 9 main categories of consciousness. And just think through of how you think about it. Because, as I said, that's the point of this little talk, is to say that your fundamental theory of consciousness must be the precursor or the foundation on which your belief system or analysis of AI consciousness must be built up from. So with materialism theories, I say yes. AI consciousness, I would say, is sure, that there's sure to be, not today, or maybe not in 20, 30 years, as the optimists would think. Maybe it'll take 1,000 years to get a real AI consciousness in a materialistic theory of consciousness world. But I'm not dealing with timeframes here and the complexity. I'm dealing with in-principle ideas. Because there are, if consciousness is entirely material, which is a materialist theory, we have those 10 categories and then the roughly 100 theories below them. If any of those are true in a pure materialistic way, AI consciousness is sure, because there's no ultimate defeater. Again, I'm not dealing with time frame. Some people say, "Oh, it's impossible because AI would have to be embodied. You have to have an embodiment and a relation." But that's easy enough to do. Embodied AI is a new subset that's developing immediately. Embodied AI, that term was put in the marching orders in China a few days ago by the premier as one of the target things that China is doing: embodied AI, along with AI regularly. Google just announced a robotic move towards embodied AI. So my point is, if you need embodiment for consciousness under a materialistic worldview, you'll get it. I'm not predicting when. I'm not a Ray Kurzweil, giving, 2049 or whatever the recent dates are. But it eventually must be able to be done. Okay, that's number one. Under non-reductive physicalism, remember, it's under non-reductive physicalism, consciousness is still physical, but it's not quite as certain because you have these extra two elements that non-physical, non-reductive physicalism needs that materialism does not need. And that's why it makes it non-reductive, because materialism per se is reductive. So non-reductive physicalism almost sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not, because they add these two concepts of a strong emergence and top-down causation. Now, both are controversial, and I can make an argument for them and I can make an argument against them. But under, if that is true, if non-reductive physicalism is the theory of consciousness, I'd say AI consciousness would be almost as certain as under materialism. And the reason it's almost is because you have these two other aspects of strong emergence and top-down causation that you need to embed in your theory. In quantum theories, if a quantum theory is the fundamental answer to consciousness, then I would say not only is AI consciousness possible, but potentially it would be my lead choice for the theory that would enable AI consciousness in the most effective or efficient manner, because quantum computing will certainly lead to an exponential increase in computing power via superpositions that are occurring, and that exponential increase in computing power would vastly exceed that which materialism without quantum theories could provide. I mean, you could say quantum theories, because it's part of the universe, is a physicalism theory, but I'm trying to cut it more finely. So, in my opinion, if a quantum theory of consciousness is the real theory of consciousness, then AI consciousness would have the highest chance of success. As I said, I think it has under materialism, I think it's sure over a period of time, but if quantum theories are right, it would probably be sooner due to the exponential increase. Under integrated information theory, it's the one I'm most uncertain about, because as I look at it per se and analyze it, it would seem to have the possibility of AI consciousness, although the main proponents, including Giulio Tononi, think that AI consciousness is not possible. So I certainly give them their due. I understand it. But and again, we're not talking about IIT right now as a theory. We're just looking at all the theories, not to adjudicate them one versus the other, but to say what are the implications for each in the context of AI consciousness. That's all I'm doing at this point, limiting myself, hard as it is. Under panpsychism, where every element of the physical world has something of consciousness, whether it's proto-consciousness or whether it is actual consciousness, that everything is together, that would seem to make the process of AI consciousness a little bit easier, at least to a first approximation, because you already have consciousness in everything, and it's how you group it together. Now, that brings up the whole concept of how little pieces of consciousness, extremely little, come together. It's called the combination problem, and the combination problem certainly would exist in AI consciousness, and it exists in the whole panpsychism advocacy. That's their biggest problem. How do you get from tiny things to a big thing, and how do you get that occur in some kinds of things like brains, and not in other kinds of things like jackets. So panpsychism certainly could lead to an AI consciousness, but it actually seems to be a little more complicated, because you have to, in a sense, manipulate. Because remember, to create AI consciousness, there has to be some kind of human manipulation or structure, or AI manipulating itself after a while in creating it. So you have to have a technology of able to make changes and to construct things. And so how you do this seems simplest in materialist theories, it seems like you have more horsepower or computing power in quantum theories. And in panpsychism theories, where you have the consciousness and everything to begin with, it's a little hard to see how you have that manipulative power and technology power. But it doesn't seem, it's certainly not excluded in principle. Monisms, and where there's one fundamental thing, a lot of people like dual aspect monism. There's one thing, and sometimes it, like a particle in a wave, it looks like one, looks like the other, and dual aspect monism. Sometimes it looks like a physical thing, and sometimes it looks like a consciousness thing, but it's really the same thing. It would seem in principle that it would not be, AI consciousness would not be excluded. Dualism is the one category that would absolutely exclude AI consciousness if that consciousness requires some kind of non-physical substance or substrate, a soul, a spirit, a non-physical component, call it whatever you will. But if there's some non-physical element that's needed in consciousness, which dualism by its very term, you have two different things, requires, then AI consciousness would not be possible unless you somehow could add that non-physical element into it. Now, how would you do that? Well, there is a theory. One of the theories I had, I'm sure you didn't see it, but in the 20 or so categories under dualism, I had a category called emergent dualism. And emergent dualism says that when physical things come together in a certain way, that there's some meta psychophysical laws of the universe that says when that organization of matter comes together, it would automatically produce a non-physical entity. This is the kind of thing that is impossible to refute, but it is an interesting way to think about. So even under dualism, AI consciousness would not be excluded. Now, to be entirely universally exhaustive, is there any other way under dualism that AI consciousness could occur? Yeah, if there is a God, and if God created a soul or spirit that makes dualism, if that all happened, and if God decided to put the same kind or a different kind of soul or spirit in an animal or a human or a machine, then that could happen. So I say that non-facetiously. I'm just trying to give a logical way of thinking about each of the theories of consciousness. That's all I'm doing today. That's what I want to do today. Under idealism, in which everything is consciousness, or everything fundamental is conscious in the physical world, is either a mirage that appears or is real and it's derivative of consciousness, one or the other. Different, in different, even in Indian philosophy, which is the richest and most original on idealism, you have both kinds, where the physical world is a dream or an illusion, or it's real but just emerged out of consciousness. It would seem like you have a head start in terms of AI consciousness, because everything is consciousness in a sense. But then it's not clear, because then the manipulation of how you deal with this ultimate consciousness and change it from one form to another, we have no idea. We have no idea how our individual consciousness comes out of an idealism. That's called the decomposition problem. Panpsychism has a composition problem. How do you get little pieces of consciousness to make a human consciousness, say? And idealism is the opposite. You have this giant consciousness. So how do you balloon off or siphon off little pieces of this total idealism into a individual consciousness? And then the final psi theories, by generally, most of them have something beyond the physical that's needed. And it doesn't have to be a spirit or soul. It can be something else. It could be some sort of a tuning into a universal grid of some kind. Who knows? But once again, you'd have to be able to manipulate it. And so what then I dealt with these other topics. What I'd like to do now is go back to give a general sense. I wanted, as I said, to give you a sense that in order to understand AI consciousness, you must have a theory of consciousness. And when you have your theory of consciousness, all the theories of consciousness that are extant today. And since I published this paper, I've had more than 100 new theories being thrown at me from all over the world, different people. I try to respond. Some of them are interesting, but I can't tell you that I feel bad I left out any one of them. When we're gonna have a landscape of consciousness website in the future, and we're going to include everything. We'll include more than I have in the paper because we have more in. But I don't think there's any major category that has been left out. And so these are the categories you have to think about when you think about AI consciousness. Now, what are the implications of it? Let me just give you one, and there are hundreds of different implications of AI consciousness. It is often spoken that the human future will be to colonize the galaxy and ultimately the entire universe through so-called Van Neumann probes, which is a space probe that can replicate itself and take the minerals and resources on different planets, recreate themselves, and send out new probes in an ever-expanding exponential colonization. And people can calculate that done within certain technological constraints, you could colonize the entire Milky Way galaxy, which is a hundred or so light, 1,000 light years by 25,000 in a finite period of time, like 10 million years, which is really a blip on in the universal time scale. And then beyond that, it would take maybe 1 billion years to colonize the local group, or however long it takes. But it is doable. Now, my question is this. Technologically, that sounds doable. Again, the time frame will be vast, but doable. Uh, will those entities, and this is super, super intelligent AI and orders of magnitude, a googolplex of orders of magnitude more than we have now, where virtually every atom, if not submolecule, can be computing in some way. There is a limit, but based on the number of particles, but enormous. Will that be conscious? Because if it is conscious, if it is, which is the assumption many people have, then those Van Neumann probes and filling the galaxy with our human created probes will have a kind of value, as I would look at it. But if they're not conscious, because the theory of consciousness does not allow that, but they do colonize the galaxy, to me that would have a much lesser value. That it would almost seem, to quote my favorite prophet, Steven Weinberg, pointless. And I leave you with that thought. One last thought on virtual immortality. Virtual immortality is the idea that you can upload the real you, not a clone, not a genetic, a digital clone, like you'd have an identical twin, genetic twin, but a real digital clone. Would that be you? Um, Many people assume that's obviously the case. People are trying to do it now, so that in their own lifetime, billionaires and stuff. Others philosophically think that doesn't work. I would just point out this. There are two steps in virtual immortality. The first step is what I would call AI consciousness. Is AI consciousness possible? Because I would argue that if AI consciousness, under your theory of consciousness, is not capable, if the theory of consciousness is not capable of sustaining an AI consciousness, then virtual immortality is absolutely, in principle, impossible. So the first step you have to get in terms of a virtual immortality is AI consciousness. Once you get that, if you can get that under your theory of consciousness, then to get to virtual immortality is a second step. And it's a huge second step, which we could, spend a whole lecture on. So I just want to leave you with those things. Thank you very much. Open for questions, Susan, and love to engage. I try to finish right on time, even though we started late. So hopefully we have time for a few questions.
Great. This was absolutely wonderful. So we have time for just a few questions. Anybody? Yes. So in the back here, first hand up, it was Tam Hunt.
Hi, Robert. Tam Hunt from UCSB.
Hi, Tam.
Great talk. Hi. Great talk. I wanted to ask you about EM field theories because you list them in your taxonomy, but you didn't discuss them in relation to AI. I am partial to that category of theory. And I think that today's AI is probably not conscious because it's not built on EM field computers. It's built on EM dampening computers, known as von Neumann architecture computers. Any
Right.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, first of all, I commend the question because it highlights the whole spirit of what I'm trying to achieve. I learned a lot about EM theories when I did the Landscape of Consciousness paper. I've grown to respect them, and there are many varieties of it. One you're presenting, but there are many others that are similar, maybe even synergistic. And I think these have real merit in any theory of consciousness. And if that is the case, again, my whole point is whatever the theory of consciousness is the implications for AI consciousness. So if your theory is correct, then those concepts in terms of field theories would have to be structured, manipulated, and built into new kinds of computers. Wouldn't be computers in the same sense at all, that would have, global fields in them as well as the equivalent of neuronal impulses in order to emulate the human brain, which is what you would be doing if you contend that EM theories, particularly the overarching resonances, are the theory of consciousness, which enables us to have our consciousness in a materialistic category, then I see no objection whatsoever to that being done. But until that would be done, you would never have AI consciousness, no matter how powerful your computer would be. Even if it were a quantum computer, it wouldn't work if your theory is correct. And so that point, so I'm not adjudicating whether your theory is correct or not, but rather saying that the nature of the correct theory is an immediate indication of whether and then how AI can become conscious.
Very quick question, John Avery. Did I pronounce your name right? Avery.
Yes. Hi, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jonathan. I'm here with the Wharton Accountable AI Lab. I was originally going to ask you about materialism and the ways that the word is used or misused, but I'd actually rather ask you about something you hinted at earlier. Now that we have corporations racing to develop conscious systems, given that many of us, I think including you, are sort of skeptical of the whole project because we don't know that there's really a consensus about what we're looking for in the first place. Well, on the one hand, it seems that you think that it's not just that there's a low probability of creating AI systems, because in fact, if materialism is right, the probability is fairly high, but you think that there's a high amount of uncertainty as to whether these things are possible, and whether we're even asking the right questions. At the same time, the stakes are quite high. I mean, what if we create a sentient system, we don't know how to design it, and we accidentally hurl a being, 10 beings, potentially infinite beings into lives of conscious suffering? Do we have a duty against that? Or what if we create them and they do have interests that compete with ours? So my question isn't just whether you think that we should have these beings come into existence, but given that we are in this unusual position where there's high uncertainty and really high magnitude, where does that put the expected utility for you of pursuing this line of research? Do you think that that might actually suggest that we have a mild duty against even embarking on this line of research to begin with?
Lots of questions there that demands a course of 4 months, not a quick comment. I would just say that all of your points are very well taken, and really none of that is in my scope of what I want to do. I just want to emphasize the importance of a theory of consciousness to create that, the implications of all of this. I would say, putting on a different hat, a geopolitical hat, notwithstanding the ethical or significant risks of AI systems in the future, it is doubtful to me that that can be controlled, because it doesn't have to be controlled by a majority. It has to be controlled by unanimity, and that in our troubled world won't happen. So I'm afraid to say whatever can happen will happen. The time frame may be different, but I think all all situations will occur. There have been attempts to say, how can we know an AI is consciousness? There's been a significant paper that assumed computational functionalism, which is, a third order materialism theory in order to do that. I think that is flawed in terms of the fundamental assumption, but you can do that. I mean, in practical fact, there's no way to know whether anything else is conscious. It's the philosophical problem of other minds. You don't know whether I'm conscious. I don't know whether you're conscious. You have an assumption, an induction, because everything about you is similar to everything about me. So I assume that when you feel pain, or when you look like you feel pain, you feel the same kind of pain that I feel. But I can never prove that. And the same thing is true with AI. So it's an unknown world, but it's a world in which we are headed irreversibly. I just
So
want to comment
Robin
again.
Hanson has the last question. That was
Okay.
sobering. And then we have to set up for the next session. We're on a terribly tight schedule.
I'm following up on the last question. If there's a conflict between our speeding ahead to, fill the universe with some sort of copies or AIs and our not understanding consciousness, and then you don't think we can slow down the acceleration, can we speed up the research on consciousness? By how much should we speed up the research on consciousness to have a chance of figuring out the answers to these key questions before it's too late?
Good. I'm all for speeding up consciousness research. I love it. On
Me
all
too.
fronts. And one thing that I promote strongly is this diversity of not closing off alternatives, which many people do, and reject theories out of hand. I demand that theories be internally consistent, be logical, and be subject to analysis. I'm not a universalist, everybody's right, kumbaya kind of approach to consciousness studies, not at all. But I am skeptical of the capacity to give definitive answers to these questions. I'm less skeptical than I was, but still I have a degree of skepticism. But the fact that we should address theories of consciousness from every angle, this conference being one, is a great idea. I support what you're saying 100%, and I'll carry the flag with close to the truth and everything else we can do strongly and make the point as strong as possible. Again, I say my talk on the landscape of consciousness, in which I describe it in depth, is on Closer to Truth. You can see that if you like. But it's a pleasure to interact with everyone at MindFest and MindFest in general as part of our consciousness quest.
Robert, thank you so much. And we really look forward to partnering with you for these interviews for the MindFest keynote. So you can all listen to more interviews with Robert on his wonderful show. And with our MindFest keynotes, there's going to be a series of 8 shows based on MindFest coming up in dialogues with Robert. They're being filmed right now, in fact, over at our green room. Robert, thank you for your time. We're really honored that you were able to come.
Thanks everyone for participating. See you soon.